I'm Petra. I had a vaginal birth after 3 cesareans. I'm a VBAC doula and birth educator, and I feel called to tell you that you deserve the birth experience that you want. I want you to join me every week to hear empowering birth stories, heart-led conversations, practical tips, evidence-based information, and yes, we definitely dive into the woo side of things too. My hope is for you to leave each episode feeling inspired and informed. Thank you so much for including me on your journey to VBAC. Now let's get into this episode. Okay, today I have an amazing guest. Her name is, and it's Brielle.
Yes.
Okay, just had to double check. Okay. So I have Brielle, and she is a mama's coach, breathwork facilitator, and somatic trauma resolution therapist. She helps postpartum and pregnant women heal from their previous birth trauma, forgive themselves, their bodies, their babies, and their previous team so they can go into their next birth confident, free, and in tune with their motherly intuition, fully trusting themselves, their bodies, their babies, and birth. And I just have to say, just reading that, I got chills just like from those words that you wrote, because that is so important. That is so important
Yeah.
for anybody on this pregnancy and birth journey, but especially like when you're planning a VBAC. So
Yes.
I would love for you to like give us a little more insight into who you are.
Yeah. And I got chills too, actually, because I've been in my own business for about 5 or 6 years now, and I've been doing breath work and somatic trauma resolution. But because of my two birth stories and the amount of work that I did and the healing that I did after my first emergency cesarean and before the VBAC was what actually brought me into the work that I do now. I think as it does with a lot of people that are birth workers or whatever, they have a personal, type of something that has drawn them into that type of work. And because I was already doing the trauma resolution work and breath work, and then through my own healing journey, I just saw how what I was doing could so easily be intertwined into helping people prepare differently for a next birth if they want to have one, or if they don't want to have another birth, still just helping them heal from that birth, because it's still important whether you want to birth again or not.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, as you know, with somatics, and I don't know if everybody knows what somatic, healing is, but it's like things get stored in the body, different
Exactly.
situations that you go through, and it can, I mean, you could probably describe it better than I can.
Yeah, trauma literally lives in the cells of our body. So it doesn't matter. We all have trauma. Our childhood trauma, it could be, capital T, it could be seem like a bigger trauma, it could seem like a smaller trauma. It doesn't matter like the size of the trauma per se. The What it comes down to is that trauma lives in the cells of our bodies. And so if we don't do something like breath work and somatic trauma resolution work will help us do, it's a lot of hands-on and embodiment work. If we don't use that work, then the trauma continues to live in our body for the rest of our lives. And so, rather we're birthing again or not, in that sense, we are keeping it in the cells of our own body. And so, we're living with that for the rest of our lives, which can just, kind of clog us up in all types of ways, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. um, it can come out in all different ways and all different symptoms and hyper or hypoarousal states and irritability and fight, flight, or freeze. And we don't even know why we're reacting or acting in a way that we are, but it's literally from the trauma we're holding on to. So if we don't do something to work with that trauma, um, it can come out in all of our relationships and the ways that we interact with people as well. And especially the most important one, the relationship with ourselves, and just maybe not feeling safe to be in our body, or like we can disassociate a lot of times with birth and like want to actually leave our body, um and just like not be present, not physically be here in our body, because it might not feel safe to be there because of an experience that happened.
Yes. And oh my gosh, I feel like I'm gonna have to like invite you on again to do a whole other podcast on helping women to, tune into that and like
Yeah.
because it is so important. You know, I used to call myself like a robot because I wasn't able to like cry. I would just hold everything in. And then after I did all this somatic
Yeah.
healing work, I feel like I'm like a fire hydrant. Like I get just, I let emotions flow
Yes.
out
Once
and
you open up that hose, it does, it flows out. But I was the same way, I didn't feel my feelings for most of my life. And then once I started getting into this work and this healing, it flows out, but it's freeing. That's what I
yeah,
can say. Like when you feel it and you feel the things you need to, and you grieve what you need to in relation to birth and forgive yourself and move through some of those heavier emotions that you need to move through, on the other side of that, you feel so free. You
yes.
feel so light. You feel so at ease. You don't hold on to those resentments anymore towards yourself, towards your body, towards your past team, towards your baby, even, which is hard to even say, like, I have a resentment towards my baby. Most women wouldn't think that. And there's nothing wrong with you if you do, but, you can have that stored inside of you, and you gotta do something with it to move it through.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go
Mm-hmm.
ahead and dive into
Yeah.
your birth story. So I would love to hear like how you dealt with that. Okay, but first let's hear your first birth story and then we'll get through that one.
All right. So I had both of my babies in Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic. I am American, so I was living there for 5 years. I was living abroad with my husband, and that's where we got pregnant. That's where we had our babies. So with my first son, with my first baby, which is a boy, I got pregnant in 2021, and I was already into this work, and so like the breath work and the somatic. So I was very excited to have a spontaneous, natural, everything birth. Like I was going to have no interventions. I wasn't going to do any of that. But I was planning my birth at the hospital, and I had a doula, and I felt like I had like a good support team. And I ended up going with an OBGYN that my doula had him as her OBGYN, and she said, he's great, he's pro natural birth. And I didn't really know a lot of OBGYNs in the country. It's not my home country, it's a foreign country, so I was already a little fearful heading into pregnancy and heading into birth, giving birth in a foreign country and giving birth in a place that um, doesn't speak my first language, and my Spanish is not completely fluent. So this OBGYN, he was completely fluent in English. So that was another like selling factor to me, is that I can communicate fully with him, and that feels good. And I need to have that. And I kind of just stopped there. Okay, he speaks English. He's good. He's pro natural birth. She had him, and it's gonna be fine. And my whole pregnancy was completely healthy, completely normal. We didn't have any issues. But about around like 37, 38 weeks pregnant, just in the conversations we would have with him, I started to notice red flags, and I started to notice some things felt off. I started to notice when I would ask him questions I wanted to ask him, he would kind of just seemingly give me the answer I think he knew I wanted to hear. And I could feel that in his energy, but at the same time, I was 37, 38 weeks pregnant. So, what was I going to do? I wasn't like, well, I'm not, I feel those red flags, but I'm not going to trade now, I'm not going to like change providers now. It's too late. So I stuck with him, even though I had those red flags. He kind of started talking about induction. He started mentioning induction around maybe a little after 38 weeks. And I'm like, I'm not even like 40 weeks yet. And 40 weeks, right? Which we all know that that's just, it's an estimated date, right?
Right.
So he kind of started throwing around the word, and I didn't like that. And my doula just kind of supported me through it. And so because he was throwing on the word, I felt a bit of pressure. And so with my husband, I'm like, all right, start trying all these natural things, right? So we started having sex around the clock. We were having sex like day in and day out all the freaking time. And I think because of the amount of sex that we were having, I ended up getting a UTI, and I got the UTI like I think the day before my due date. and I got quite sick. I got like a fever. I had like a high fever, and also from like 39 weeks to 40 weeks, like that last week, I was having prodromal labor. So I was having like stop and go contractions for like an entire week. I would have them for hours, and then they would stop for hours, and then I would have them for hours, and then they would stop for hours. I would think I was in labor, then I was not in labor. I would think I was in labor, I was not in labor. It was like a whole week
Right.
of this.
Wow.
And then I get the UTI, and then I have this fever and I'm sick, and I didn't want to go into the doctor's office because I just knew. I knew. I was like, he's found that thing that's gonna start the rigmarole. And so I'm telling my husband, like, I don't care that I have a fever. I don't want to go in. I had already been in, I think, 3 times in the last week, and week 39. And they had done 3 membrane sweeps, which
Oh,
were just
wow.
like so terrible and so painful.
Yeah.
Um, and I consented to them, but like in hindsight, I realized I was feeling the pressure. So I was trying to get things going as naturally as we could because they kept throwing around the word induction, which I didn't want to have. And I didn't feel like I even had room or space to go past 40 weeks, hardly, with the
Right.
way they were talking about it. And also in hindsight, on top of that, I had my son the Friday before Holy Week, Easter week, which is a huge holiday in the Dominican Republic. There's a lot of Catholics. So Holy Week is a big thing, and a lot of people travel. And I later found out there were people on my team that had travel plans. And
Um,
so that induction that was being thrown around probably had an ulterior motive. But the second that I got sick and we went in there, because I did end up going after like 20, I think I was like sick for like 24 hours. And then I was like, okay, we've tried on our own. Like, I'd rather be safe. I was more in fear. And I'm like, I'd just rather be safe than sorry. And it was my first pregnancy. Again, I'm in a
mhm.
foreign country. So we go into the office, and that was like his ticket to be like, okay, you're sick. We need to induce because you've had these prodromal prodromal labor. You've had these contractions. He told me, actually, he's like, you've been in labor all week, which I know now, like that was not labor, but he was like, you've been in labor all week, but your contractions are not progressing. And you have this UTI now. And so now he's checking the baby's heart rate, and the baby's heart rate is high. And so we just need to get things going. We need to bring you to the hospital. We need to induce so we can get this labor to pick up. And so I was just like, okay, yeah, sure, let's do that. Like I was fearful. The baby's heart rate was high. And I was just like, all right, let's go. And so my husband and I, we went, and I got induced that morning. And meanwhile, I'm still sick. And so they ran the test to see what was I sick with, and it was a UTI. And so then they're also pumping in antibiotics to me while they're inducing me. So I have like a lot of things going through. And then my fever is coming back and forth all day long while I'm being induced. And so my fever would break, and my contractions would pick up. And then I kid you not, every time my doctor came into the room, because he stayed out for a good portion of it, like my doula did help with that. But every time he would come into the room, my contractions would stop. Like my
Oh,
body would like literally completely like, nope, we don't feel safe here.
right.
Which made a lot of sense. Like in hindsight, I also shouldn't have had a male doctor just because of like past personal stuff. And it just, yeah. So he would come in, they would stop. And so after like all day, like 9 to 5, and nothing progressed
Mhm.
in terms of my dilation because my body wasn't actually ready to go into labor. He was like, well, the baby's heart rate's really high. And he's like, I've tried to honor your wishes, but it's just not safe anymore for him to be in there. And so we were like, okay, well, it sounds like we don't have any other options, based off like what you're saying. And we want the baby to be safe. And so he's like, we need to go into a C-section. So we did. We went into a C-section. My son was born around like 6 p.m. that night. And he came out, and he had his meconium already like inside of me, which I know now is like can also be a form of normal. But at the time I was just like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like he had pooped, it wasn't safe.
Right.
They were kind of telling me more things to make me think, oh, okay, he really did need to be this C-section, like,
Yeah.
oh, his cord was not wrapped around his head, but it was like in a way that he couldn't descend. And that's why your contractions weren't picking up. But like in hindsight, after I healed everything, I just realized my body wasn't ready. I was trying to pressure my body to be ready when we
Mhm.
just weren't there yet,
Right.
from the pressure that I was feeling to try to avoid things. But nonetheless, he was born. He was healthy. He was fine. And it was weird. I had my son and I just had like no reaction, like
Right.
I felt kind of numbed. Like my husband cried tears of joy. He was really
Oh,
excited. I might have shed like a little tear, but honestly, I just felt so like what just happened, like to my body and like what I went through. And like the postpartum was really, really, really hard. Like I was a new mom and I couldn't stop crying every single day. Breastfeeding was hard. And then finally, about 6 weeks, or not 6 weeks, 6 months after I had my C-section, I was still having pain, physical pain at my scar site. And that's when I was like, okay, I don't think this is normal. I think I need to get some help now. So
right.
yeah, that was the first birth.
Oh, wow. And so did you figure out, was there something like wrong with your cesarean scar area while you were having
No,
pain?
there was nothing wrong, but honestly, like what I know in terms of like how our body holds trauma and like how
Mhm.
emotional of a birth it was for me and how distraught I was about everything. I think a lot of the mental and emotional pain and trauma and stress that I was feeling was manifesting physically as well. There was no physical, there's nothing medically like physically wrong.
Mhm.
I did at that point, I did start working on my birth in many different ways. I worked it at the physical level and started working with an osteopath, and he completely helped with like the physical stuff. But then I also started working it like emotionally and spiritually as well.
Right. Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So then did you have a plan for your next birth, or did you guys plan that you were going to have another baby after that?
We always thought we would want at least two babies. So after that, I was kind of like, well, what the hell do we do if like we have another baby and we're still in the DR? And I actually remember like that OBGYN telling me right after my birth that I could have a VBAC with him one day if I wanted to. But
Hmm.
after that day, I wanted nothing to do with this man. I was like, I'm
Right.
done with you. Like
Yeah.
I went back in for my postpartum visits and he actually told me, what did he say? I was asking him some clarifying questions about things that happened, just trying to get, make sure I really fully understood what all went on. And his response to my questions were, we're not going to blame and point fingers at anybody.
Oh my gosh.
So after that, I was like, well, we're not coming back to you anymore.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so then after that, when we did want to get pregnant again, it was wild. I did all the healing work and then we started talking. I think we were in the stage of like, okay, we're going to try soon. I started to meet people in the DR that were having home births, which I didn't think was legal in the DR. And that's the whole reason I didn't try a home birth the first time is because I thought it was illegal because I'd never heard of anyone having a home birth there. Even my doula thought it was illegal,
Oh, wow.
because that's how rare and unheard of it is to have a home birth there. So right before we start trying to get pregnant, I start actually, the universe is like popping up these people that are having home births in the DR. And I was like, what? You can do this here?
Hmm.
And I was just mind blown.
And then so that like propelled you to want to have a home birth for your VBAC.
That, yeah. Well, like I said, I kind of wanted to have a home birth for my first birth. I just didn't think
Hmm.
it was possible there. But yes, meeting those people, I was like, okay, it's a sign. Like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. All these people are popping up into my life now. And I'm learning more about how to have a home birth in the DR and the logistics and the paperwork and this is the lawyer you go to and all this because it's not illegal but it's just so uncommon that like Dominicans don't know how to deal with it really. Like if you have it they're like no, you can't do this just cuz like people don't do it and it's kind of like culturally hard for them to think outside of like a straight line of how to do things, and like to do things outside of the box culturally is just kind of a little bit more challenging there. Um, so yeah, it was definitely like me going against any type of norm or anything.
Yeah. So then when did you get pregnant?
So I got pregnant, I guess September of last year, September of 2023, we found out.
Hmm.
Um, and I was like, okay, how are we going to do this? Because in the DR, there's only one midwife in where we lived, in the capital of 2 million people. There's
Whoa.
one midwife. That's how rare it is.
Oh my gosh.
So of course I found out about her through my friends that had used her that I met. I met with her. She tells me I'm not going to be doing births during when you're due. Like her dad was sick. She's like, I'm not going to be doing births when you're due. And I was
Mm.
like, okay, we meet this one midwife finally, and you're not going to be doing births like while we have our baby. So we were just kind of determined. And my husband just literally did a Google search of traveling midwives. And we started looking into traveling midwives. And the first person he found, the website, he sent it to me. I was like, she looks really cool. She was from Texas, and we reached out to her, and I was like, let's just have the Zoom call. We thought it's probably going to be too expensive. We're probably not going to be able to afford it. Well, let's just have the Zoom call anyway and just see what it's about, see what the price is. We had the call with her, and as soon as we hopped off, I like looked at my husband. I was like, love her. I was like, I love her so much. Like intuitively, I was like, that's my girl. I
Yeah.
was like, that's who's supposed to be at my birth. And then she sent her packages, and it like wasn't too bad. It was within our, it was affordable, and we could make it work. So we were like, okay, seems kind of crazy because she lives in Texas and we live in the Dominican Republic, and
Right.
birth is unpredictable. So how are we going to know that she's going to actually be there at our birth? So, but we went out on a whim because intuitively it just felt so right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So then
Yeah.
how was your pregnancy?
So my pregnancy was good. It was healthy, just like the first one. I had a OBGYN in the DR okay, I had three different OBGYNs in the DR for my backup option, and also to
Right.
see like prenatally the whole time. So the midwife that I met, she had recommended two people. So I started with one of the OBGYNs that she had recommended. That woman ended up dropping me because I wasn't fluent in Spanish and she wasn't fluent in English, and she didn't
Oh.
feel comfortable. And I'm glad she did at the end of the day, because
Hmm.
that was what was supposed to happen. So after she dropped me, I went with the other one that the midwife had recommended, the other OBGYN, and I stuck with her from I my whole second trimester and a little bit into my third trimester. I stuck with her. And she knew my plans the whole time of like having a home birth and having a traveling midwife. And she knew that this was like kind of the backup option. We were very open about things. She was very direct, which I liked, but she also didn't have a whole lot of soft nurturing side to her, which I felt like was missing. I wanted
Mm.
both. I
Right.
wanted someone that was direct and honest, but also nurturing. And the first woman was like nurturing and soft and sweet and feminine, but like not direct. And the
Mm.
second one was like super direct and blunt, but not soft and nurturing. I'm like, I need somebody with both. And
Right.
a couple other things she had said along the way, like the bedside manner just wasn't great. And there was a couple things she had said along the way, and I felt those red flags. And I was like, hey, I love my first option, but we don't know what's going to happen at the end of the day. Birth is unpredictable. I need to love my second option as well. And I need to feel confident that my second option is really pro VBAC, because that's hard to find there. So we went back to the drawing list of people. Some girl that had had a home birth in the DR had given me a list of like potential OBGYN. Should I go? And there was one on there, and we went to her. I think I like 33 weeks pregnant. that we switched to that OBGYN. And with her, I was like, yes, you're it. You're my backup option. Like you're direct. She was kind of like my midwife in that you're direct, yet you're nurturing, you're soft, you're honest with me. And she looked me in the eyes, which like no other OBGYN had done there in the DR. And she looked me in the eyes and made these like promises, like, yes, you're gonna have like 1 hour of skin to skin with your baby after they're born. I promise you. Like, no, we're not gonna take your baby from you. Because that was done like the first time. And that was like a big part of my trauma. And what else? Just like she told me before I asked, like, you had a cesarean. She's like, oh, you go. She's like, you can go 42 weeks plus 3 days. Like we don't want to induce. We want everything to happen naturally.
Yeah.
And like just everything she told me was so aligned. And I believed her. Like I could feel from her that I could trust her. Like my intuition was like, yes, she's going to be the backup option. I feel that she is the best backup option. And so that's the one we went with. And that's actually the woman that delivered my baby.
Oh, wow. Wow. So then, okay, so we jumped
Yeah.
ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's get into the labor.
Right. So, my midwife was scheduled to come the day before my due date. She had her flight booked the day before my due date, but over 1 week before her flight was supposed to come. So nine days before her flight was supposed to come, I lost my mucus plug and had like a bloody show. And so, of course, I told her, and she was like, it could be tomorrow. It could be 2 weeks from now. We don't know. And so again, going into my intuition, like I really had to like set aside all the fears and be like, intuitively, what do I feel? And I'm like, Brittany, is there any way you can come sooner? And she's like, the soonest I can, this was a Thursday. She's like, the soonest I can come is Sunday. So like a week earlier than she was supposed to come. She was like, as long as you can pay the difference in airfare. Like, yes, of course. So she scheduled her flight for a week earlier than what it was. She flew in that Sunday, and I was having a bit of prodromal labor, like from that Thursday to Sunday, like on and off. And she comes in that Sunday. She lands, she stayed at an Airbnb on our street.
Oh, wow.
And she was there at 3 p.m. And that night at 7 p.m., my contractions labor started. Like,
wow.
And my water broke at like 11 p.m. that night that she ended up landing.
Oh my God.
So it was just like such an intuitive move to be like, yeah, you need to come as soon as you can. And she's like, as soon as I can is Sunday. And that was like the day it all started.
Wow.
Yeah. So my water broke Sunday night. She came over. She was just down the street. And my doula came over like a couple hours later. My husband was asleep. I didn't wake him up because I had prodromal labor with this pregnancy already a couple days, and I'd had prodromal labor for a week the prior pregnancy. So I was like, I'm not going to wake up. I don't know for real if this is going on or not. I'm just going to let him sleep for now.
Yeah.
And my contractions like were picking up and they were finding a regular rhythm. And she was like, just ask me questions, kind of testing, see where I'm at. And she knew I didn't want to be checked or anything because of the last time. And the whole like, oh, you're at because I was like the last time I was checked on a Saturday, oh, you're at a 1. And the next Saturday, oh, you're only at a 1.5. You've only progressed half a centimeter in a week. And so I was like, she knew she was not going to like offer that.
Yeah.
So she just came over at 11 p.m. that Sunday night. And I had my husband, I think he got up at like 4 a.m. He like heard me or something, or more of my water broke. And he got up and he ended up setting up the birth tub at like 4 or 5 a.m. My contractions were strong. They were like regular, strong, but not like super close together, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes apart. And I was in the birth tub, and then I was out of the birth tub on the birth ball, just, finding comfort measures. My doula came over around 5 a.m. It felt pretty intense at that point. And then my son woke up in the morning. He was just turned 2 like the month before.
Hmm.
And our nanny was there with him, but that kind of like broke the flow of things a little bit. Like my contractions slowed down a little bit when he was up, and the nanny was getting him ready for school because he was like talking to me, and it kind of was like hard not to be in mom mode, even though the nanny was there.
Right.
So things slowed down a little bit while he was getting ready to school, but then he went off to school, and then my things started picking back up. And I was like, I just got to get out of the apartment. My husband's like, let's go on a walk. So it's like Monday morning, we're like going on a walk. I'm in labor, and cars are, it's a big city. So like cars are on their way to work, and they're like passing by, and I'm like stopping and like hunched over him, and people are stopping and they're like, are you okay? Like all in Spanish. And
Oh,
like I'm
wow.
in labor, like on the side of the street. And I'm like, fine, fine.
Yeah.
I'm like doing lunges like on the street, not knowing about how much more time I'm going to have in my labor. And he's like, let's pick things up. So I'm like doing lunges and like exercising and moving. I wish I would have reserved some of that energy because I didn't know it was going to go on more than 24 hours after that.
Right.
But so whatever. So things pick back up. We go back inside. I'm feeling better. Things have picked back up to where they were, maybe a little bit more than before, which felt like, it was active labor for sure. And I just, same thing in the birth tub, off on the birth ball, just back and forth. And then my son comes home from school in the afternoon, kind of the same thing. They slow down a little bit more. Then he goes for his nap. They pick back up a little bit more. And then he's up for the evening. They slow down again. And it's just kind of like going like, actually, wait. Okay, let me back up. He went for his nap around 1 p.m. So I went into labor the night before at 11. Around 1 p.m. on Monday, things were feeling intense. And my midwife asked, do you want me? I can check if you want me to. I also don't have to. And at this point, she had actually thought like the Sunday night I went into labor that I was going to have the baby quickly because of like how quickly things were seeming to progress.
Hmm.
So she was kind of expecting the baby to be there by like Monday morning. Well, that didn't happen. And so Monday afternoon, my son was napping, and she was like, want me to check? It's pretty intense. I can tell it's intense for you now. And I'm like, you know what? You can check. Just don't tell me the number. Tell my husband, and he can decide if I should know the number or not.
Hmm.
So she checks me. It's like 1 p.m. Monday, and right away, all this water gushes out. Like the rest of my water breaks, or more water breaks, and she just blurts out like, "You're fully dilated."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Really? Great news," because like I hadn't been checked at all. I'm like, that's awesome because this is really intense, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so she's like, you're ready to push. But at the same time, I was like, I don't feel the sensation. Like I don't feel the urge to need to push. And she was like, sorry, there's something in my eye. She was like, well, she was like, sometimes first births or VBACs might not feel the urge to push. So that's possible. And so I was just like, okay, sure. So she kind of like helped, her and my doula helped me like find birthing positions that would work. And we tried a lot of different positions. We tried in the tub, we tried on the birth ball, we tried squatting, we tried on all fours. We got on the bed at one point. We had like an assisted with like my husband behind me. I mean, like you name it, like not typical, like legs up, laying back kind of thing, but anything else, like you name it, I feel like we tried it in the
Wow.
birth tub, out of the birth tub, all the different positions in the birth tub. We tried so much, and I pushed, I think, for 4 or 5 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there was a lot of tears, and there was a lot of, I cannot do this. I'm not
Right.
doing this anymore. I'm done. I can't do it. My husband telling me I can do it. They're like, my doula really, like everyone really just like looking me in the eyes and being just like, you need to focus. Like, my midwife would even put her finger in and be like, just push towards my finger. And I was exhausted because I hadn't slept the whole night before. And even like the 3 nights before that, while I was in prodromal labor, I
Right.
wasn't sleeping great. So like
Yeah.
my sleep was already really crap for like the past 4 days. And then the eating factor of like, you don't want to eat, but you need to eat, but it's all gross and dry. And I was like, bleh, with
Yeah.
everything. And so then I was just like, I think getting kind of like weak and unfocused and a little delirious. And
Yeah.
so after pushing for like 4 or 5 hours, she was like, you're tired. Like, let's give this a break. And she was checking the baby like intermittently, and she had checked, and baby's heart rate's fine. Your heart rate's fine. Like, you guys are healthy. Like, let's just give it a break for a little bit. And I was like, thank you. Like, I'm
Hmm.
exhausted.
Yeah.
Um, and so I laid on the bed and like had really intense contractions, like for the next couple of hours. And then that evening, after my son had went to bed, this is now Monday evening, she was like, do you want me to check you again? Do you not? Like, she's like, I don't really know what's going on. Like it's been going on. I'm like, and I'm like, okay, sure. And she checks me in a different position and she goes, I have bad news. And I was like, yeah, exactly what? That's not what you
Right.
want to hear after almost 24 hours of labor and
Yeah.
4 or 5 hours of pushing. But she's like, I have bad news. And I'm like, okay, give it to me. Like, I guess I need to know.
Right.
And when she checked me, the layer of my cervix, I didn't know there's 2 layers of the cervix, but the layer she was feeling the second time was not fully dilated.
Mm.
And it was about at a 7. And the first time she had checked me, she was feeling either the inner or the outer, I forget, but she could only feel one layer from the position I was in the first time. That layer was fully dilated. The other layer was not fully dilated. And so the reason why I was pushing all that time and there was no progression is because I wasn't actually fully dilated with both layers of my cervix.
Hey, I just needed to interject really quick because I didn't want you to get confused. The cervix is not considered to have 2 distinct layers, but rather a single structure that opens up as it dilates. Okay, so I'm thinking because she said that she was in a different position the next time that her midwife checked her and the dilation was different. So sometimes that just happens where the dilation could be different feeling. And remember, dilation is so subjective to the person that is checking. And I don't know the midwife that she has, so I'm not able to confirm what she may have thought, but I just wanted to make sure that you knew there are not 2 layers to the cervix. All right, back to Brielle's story.
So I had pushed for like 4 or 5 hours and there was no progression because I wasn't actually fully dilated with both layers of my cervix.
Wow.
And so that was pretty discouraging, but it also kind of like made sense to me. I was like, okay, well, I guess like that sucks that I just did all that work for all that time and didn't really need to. But at the same time, I was like, okay, there's nothing wrong with my body. It's fine. And that's probably why I didn't feel the urge to push.
Right.
And so she was like, she laid out my option. She's like, you're healthy, baby's healthy. You can stay here as long as you want. Or if you want to go to the hospital, if you need like a relief, I was like, I'm gonna get through. Like, let's keep going.
Hmm.
And so I was back in the birth tub. And then it gets to I'm laboring again. It gets to the point where, and it's intense. It's like intense the whole day and night. It's the point where it's like around 11 midnight, like Monday night. And I feel like crap. I feel completely, like so low energy. Like I just felt like drained, exhausted, like completely drained. I felt like I couldn't drink enough water to be like hydrated. I was drinking a lot of water, but I just felt like it wasn't like hydrating me. I just felt weak. I felt delirious. One of my eyes was like, I couldn't see out of one of my eyes. I was like losing it. I was like, I don't know what's going on. My husband did acupuncture on me throughout my whole second pregnancy because he actually has a certification in acupuncture and I had the needles. And so I'm like, let's try some acupuncture. So he does acupuncture on me like while I'm in labor to help the nausea and to help labor progression. And the other thing was to help give me energy. So he's doing acupuncture on me while I'm having contractions. And then Brittany's like, my midwife is like, when's the last time you ate some protein? So we're like, okay, maybe she needs some. So I eat some chicken. I'm like hating it, but my husband's like force feeding me chicken. I'm like, this is so disgusting. This is dry. And then like I get back in the birth tub and it's probably like close to 1 a.m. I felt so terrible. And right after I had the chicken, right after you finished the acupuncture, I got in the birth tub and I just projectile vomited everywhere.
Oh
And
no.
after I did, I was like, I feel better.
Oh, well, that's amazing.
Because like I feel great now. I mean, not great. Don't get me wrong, not great, but I was like, I feel better. I can keep going.
Yeah.
So at this point, like my husband, my midwife, my doula had to leave because her daughter was sick. My husband and my
Mm,
midwife were there, like falling asleep on the floor because we're into
right.
night 2 now and they're exhausted, falling asleep. He's on the floor, she's on the couch. And so I'm basically just kind of like laboring on my own in the tub
Yeah.
from like 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. And I'd have it come on and I'd moan through it and it'd be so intense. And then I would sleep between. And at this point,
Yeah.
between was like 15 30 seconds max. They were
Oh, wow.
coming really close together. But it's 4 a.m. and she's awake now. And she's like, do you want me to check you again? I'm like, yeah, just check me. Like, I'm so exhausted.
Yeah.
She checks me and she's like, you're still like at that like 7.5 with that one layer. And I'm like, that's it, guys. Like, I'm throwing in the towel. Like, in
Hmm.
terms of like being at home, I was just
Right.
like, it was like, I surrender. Like, my body's been through so much this last 35 hours.
Hmm.
And I'm exhausted. I was like, I really want an epidural. I was like, I really want an epidural because in my mind, this is why I wanted to go to the hospital. If I got to the hospital, I would get an epidural and then I would get a nap.
Yeah.
And then when I woke, this is what I was thinking. And then when I woke up from the nap, then I'd be ready to push the baby out. Okay.
Hmm.
So I decide let's go to the hospital. So my husband and Brittany, they start packing a bag because we didn't have one packed.
Hmm.
And the next 2 hours were freaking the most intense 2 hours of my life because we get in the car and literally as we're walking down the stairs or not walking down, went down the elevator, I'm gripping to the wall, like can hardly like get out of our apartment building because they're so intense and there's zero break between any of my surges. We get to the car and it's like 5:30 a.m. So there's nobody on the road. I was like, if we go, we need to go now because traffic is crazy at like 6. It would have taken us like 2 hours to get 5 miles away.
Oh my
So I'm
gosh.
like, so that's why we made that decision too. At that time, I'm like, we got to go now before there's people on the road.
Right.
And so we went to the hospital. I get there and I'm roaring in pain. I'm like a man. Like we go in and I'm just like, like
Yeah.
nothing is stopping. I can't even get in the pool or the ball or anything at this point. And my doula wasn't with us because her daughter was sick. My midwife stayed at our house because our nanny wasn't there yet. And my son was at our house. So somebody needed to stay with our son. So it was
Oh
just
my
me and my
gosh.
husband. So we
Yeah.
get to the hospital. Of course, he has to fill out the paperwork. So
Right.
I'm literally by myself, roaring like a lion. The people that were working in there were like, what is this woman like about? Actually, on the way to the hospital, we thought I was maybe going to have the baby in the car
Oh wow.
because I couldn't stop screaming. At that point, my husband's like, I'm getting a vasectomy after this. This is it. And I'm like, please do. I'm done with this. All of the things you say, like in
Oh
those final
yeah.
stages. We get there. He's filling out the paperwork. I'm roaring. I'm by myself. We call
Hmm.
the doctor. So she's on the way. Finally get back to the room. She's like, checks me and she goes, you're fully dilated. You're ready to push. And I was like, hell no. I was like, I'm not pushing. I was like, you don't know what I've just been through. It's like, it's been 35 hours. I already pushed 5 or 6 hours. I'm like, I want an epidural. Like,
Hmm.
give me an epidural. And she's like, well, you're fully dilated. So, like, you're not technically supposed to be having an epidural right now. I was like, I don't care. And that was the other thing that was so different with this pregnancy from the first is I really found my voice and I was
Yeah.
asking the blunt questions. I was saying the blunt things and I did not care. Like I found that in motherhood, like
Yeah.
my voice and just speaking up for myself and like using my voice. And so I just said, I was like, I don't care. I'm getting one. And she was like, okay, we'll give you one. I was
Yeah.
like begging her. So they roll me upstairs. They take me into this little room and they tell my husband, like, you're going to wait out here. And I'm just like, okay, again, nobody else is with me except my husband.
Mhm.
He's waiting out in this room. And in my mind, we're going into the room where they're just giving me the epidural. Then I'm going to take this nap, right? I get to sleep now.
Yeah.
And so they give me the epidural and my body was just grateful at this point. I was like, finally, like a rest, like
Mhm.
after 35 hours, it was a bit of a rest that I really wanted. I was really grateful for it at that time.
Right.
And they're like, okay, whenever you feel the contraction come, like you're ready to push. And I'm like, what about my nap?
Yeah.
In my head, I'm like, I need to rest.
Yes.
But I'm like, I gotta push now. And I'm like, wait, what about my husband? And
Yeah.
they're like, because I didn't think that was the room that I was gonna be in. I was just getting the epidural in there, but that was the birth room. And then I'm like, well, what about my husband? And they were like, and they said, well, he actually can't come in here because it's hospital policy that he can't come in here. And I go, to hell with your policy. I was like, absolutely not. I was livid. I'm screaming at this point. I'm like, get him in here now. This is ridiculous. He has to be in here. And they're all just kind of like looking at each other, like feeling bad. But then they're like, he's not supposed to be in here. But they're like, but what we can do is like right when the baby's about to be born, like when we see the head crown and we'll bring him in here. So I'm just like, okay, at this point. So I'm pushing each contraction. I pushed for 30 minutes without him. And after 30 minutes, they asked me, do you have a doula? And I did, but I didn't say anything about my doula that was there. And I just said, at this point, I said, my husband is my doula. Now get him in here. And they were like, okay, we'll bring him in. Because I was like, I'm not doing this without him. And so after I pushed for 30 minutes by myself, they brought him in and I just pushed 30 more minutes with him in there. And he was coaching me like a drill sergeant or like a CrossFit coach or something. But that's what I needed at
I
that
love
point
it.
because I was so exhausted. So he's like, and he's like screaming at me. And I'm like, and I'm screaming. I'm total primal mode, total lioness. And 30 minutes after he was in there, she crowned and then I pushed her out and the doctor and the pediatrician brought her straight up to me on my skin just like they had promised. And she stayed on me. And they even asked like 30 minutes later, can we take her for this? And I said no. And they said, oh,
Mm.
okay, she can stay with you. And they did not, argue with any of that. And I had that like hour with her skin to skin. And we were only in the hospital. I think like we were she was born at 7:58 a.m. I think we were out by 2 p.m. Like we were only in there a couple hours.
Oh,
They were like,
wow.
you're fine. You're good. Like you can go home. They did not keep us in there, which was great
That is
because
amazing.
we were literally only in the hospital like less than half a day. Like we were at home for 35 hours of the labor. I literally just like went there, got the epidural and pushed her out essentially, minus like the paperwork stuff and then the paperwork on the other end, but then we left.
Wow.
And it was like it just felt so redemptive and so healing and like everything that I had done to like heal my first birth felt like so worth it. And I just felt entirely different this postpartum and like after she was born than how I felt right after I had my son.
Wow. That
Yeah.
is incredible. I'm just like, oh my gosh, you are just so incredible. You spoke up for yourself and you were just like this lioness. I love it. The way you described it is just like birth is so primal. It can be so primal. And I think a lot of times we get like kind of discouraged because we see on like social media how it's just like, oh, it's all the beautiful
Calm and
calm
peaceful.
parts
Yeah.
of the birth, but in reality, it can be that way. And sometimes that is the best feeling ever because you feel like you're just coming into your own and you're not caring about what anybody thinks about you, what anybody says, because you're just being
Yeah,
yourself. You're just being whatever
exactly.
comes out.
And that was such a difference from my first pregnancy to my second. My first, I was so timid and like fearful to ask the doctor questions. And he'd give me these answers like I shouldn't be asking him questions. So then I would shy away even more and I should just trust him. And then coming into this where I'm like, I'm not holding back anything. I am who I am. I'm owning that this is my pregnancy. This is my body. This is my baby. This is my birth. And I'm not going to have any regrets at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, had I gone to the hospital and ended up having another C-section, I don't think I would have had any regrets because of how differently I did everything the entire pregnancy and birth.
Right. Oh, that is incredible. And I feel like that is like, I mean, I don't know, it's probably not everybody's goal, but I feel like that should be like a goal to kind of like aspire to is be okay with either scenario because I feel like so much of the time it's about the journey towards your VBAC. Like,
Yeah.
like in my birth, like when I was planning my VBAC at first, it was about like getting my vaginal birth and, just having that, my baby come out vaginally, period. But then as
Yeah.
I was going through it, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm figuring out so much about myself that I didn't realize. Like I was holding back. I was a people pleaser. I was just like, doing so much that
Yeah.
was going against my true self. And on that
Yes.
journey, like you said, you found your voice and learned how to speak up for yourself in a big way. And that is just
Yes.
so freeing in itself and just feeling like you can be
Yeah.
unabashedly yourself no matter what
Exactly.
happens. So,
Yeah.
oh, I love
And
that.
anytime anything felt off in the slightest, I didn't just sweep it to the side, like I really was like, nope, this feels off. I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to follow that like inner voice, that intuition. And
Yeah.
like, I'm not just going to go like, and I'm not going to think there's no other options. Like I kept my view and my lens. Like I tried to keep it very open of like, okay, if it's not this person, there's going to be something better out there. Like I like
Yes.
just held that belief that there are other options. There will be a way. Um, and so to like at the end of the day, have the VBAC and have the VBAC in the hospital, in the DR where the
Mhm.
cesarean rate in private hospitals, which I was in a private hospital both times, the cesarean rate is 90%, 90, um, is just unheard of. But then to have a VBAC is like completely like I had people in the Dominican Republic that knew like I had a cesarean and then had a vaginal birth. And they were like, but how did you do that? Like, I didn't think you could have a vaginal birth after a cesarean because that's like still the way that the thinking is there.
Yeah, which is so wild in itself. And I know we were talking before we started recording, and like the cesarean rate in some places is like 80, 90%, which is like so sad, and the fact that people think that they don't have an option and they could be,
Yeah.
it's actually like
Well,
glamorified, I feel like, in some.
and the fear, right? So it's a bit the culture is so fearful of birth and
Mm,
it's so fearful in general, but then it really translates into birth. And actually, a lot of women just end up electing to have a cesarean
right.
because they're so fearful of birth. So there is a lot of elective cesareans.
Yeah.
But I mean, not 90% of them are, elective, right?
Yeah.
There's still a lot of work to be done medically and in the healthcare system and all of that, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
hopefully in the future, there will be more than one midwife in Santo Domingo as
Gosh.
well.
Yeah, that is just so
Yeah.
wild. Oh my gosh. Well, if they're like, I feel like we touched on like intuition is like one of the biggest things. Like,
Yeah.
and I know some people, it's so hard for them to even realize what their intuition is because I feel like we live
Yeah.
in such like a fast culture that
Yeah.
we're not tuning in. We're not tuning inward to ourselves. We're on our phones, we're going to work, we're taking care of our kids, we're just like doing all the things. So, is there
Yes.
like one way or a couple ways that you would suggest for somebody that doesn't
Yes.
understand how to even tune
Yes.
into their tuition?
So I work with women a ton on hearing their intuition, listening to it, and following it. And it's been a big journey of mine as well. And so, first things first, stop asking other people for their opinions, their stories, their beliefs. I mean, if you want to follow some expert in something, that's fine, but be careful with that, even because the big part of my journey was like following so many experts and so many things that we can sometimes not hear our voice in doing so as well. I did that a lot in my motherhood journey at the beginning of becoming a mom, and just tuning out that universe. So just like sometimes you just have to kind of put your blinders on and not be asking constant advice and opinions from everyone else, because that's not going to lead you to hearing your intuition. You're going to be hearing everyone else's voice, which is a lot of noise. And another thing is like tuning out, a lot of times it's like tuning out media or news sources that are fear based. Like I never watch the news, for example, and it's not because I don't want to be informed. Like I can inform myself in other ways, but I don't want to be bombarded with fear based things constantly, right? So like
Yes.
that first birth was very fear based, and the second one was very intuitive. Like I put my blinders on. I tuned out. Another thing, this is kind of like following your intuition in a way, but like I didn't tell anybody my plans for my birth the second go around. Like the
Mhm.
only people that knew were me and my husband, and like two close girlfriends that I knew were pro like home birth and would be like supportive, and like the ones that I could talk to throughout it. So it kind of goes with your intuition, because you got to know like who are those people that are not going to put up their opinions and their arguments and whatever into my head, which ultimately gets us out of our intuition. When we have too much information, and I call it the noise versus the voice, when we have too much noise going on, we don't have space for the voice to come through,
Right.
right? So we've got to quiet like the outer world. We've got to quiet, a lot of that, and tune and have actually the space to hear the voice within. So
Yeah.
that's like a big thing to start with.
Yeah.
And then it's like starting to notice where you do follow your intuition, because everyone follows it in some way throughout their days, even if it's like micro ways. It could be like deciding what you're going to have for lunch, or like what you're going to wear to go outside for how the weather is. Like these are things that we're usually not doing out of fear unless there's like some issue with food or something. But like, granted, like we're generally doing these things like intuitively. So we are actually using our intuition every day, but just in a lot like microdose ways. So just like notice how you're using your intuition with those smaller decisions, and like what is it that's guiding you to make that choice, to make that decision, and apply that to those bigger decisions.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And one thing that I personally did was just like taking a quiet moment. And it doesn't have to be, sometimes people are like, oh, I don't have an hour to sit in quiet and listen to whatever's, going on in my brain. Like a minute. Start with a
Right.
minute, just staying
Literally.
quiet and letting
Yeah.
whatever come up, and then dealing
Yes.
with that, and then moving on from there to figure out what feels
Yes.
best to me. And it's like that gut feeling you get like, okay, I'm
Right.
feeling led, like I feel led to go this way or that way.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
sometimes, like a lot of the clients I work with too, they have like really noisy minds, and they have like a lot of thoughts consuming them. And something I teach them to do is like journal out, like set a timer for 5 minutes when you're like in that like meditation.
Mhm.
First, journal out everything that's going through your mind. So, literally, what's in your mind, just write it down on paper, to
Yes.
the point. Maybe you need 3 minutes, maybe you need five, maybe you need 10, but just to the point that like you clear out the mind, because usually what's in the mind is fear based. So if you're like trying to decide on a birth team or something regarding birth, and you have all this rigmarole going around in your head, like write it all down,
Hmm.
and then get to the point where you've written it all down so there's no more thoughts in your mind, and then just sit and then just listen. And sometimes I even ask like, what am I supposed to hear right now? What am I supposed to see right now? What am I supposed to know right now? And sometimes, like, because I've practiced this for so long, like I'll have like that wisdom come to me. Like I'll hear like words, I'll hear like a sentence, I'll hear, like wisdom like come through to me. But that's a little bit more advanced, but like you can still get quiet and
Right.
have that gut feeling like come through
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
we
And
clear out the noise.
exactly. And I didn't add that in, but I love that you did the journaling, because there can be so many things like on our to-do list for day to day, or like, oh my gosh, I have to find a OB or a midwife. I have to find a doula. I have to find, I have to do all the
Yeah.
VBAC, things that they say
Oh
on those
yeah,
kids. It's
especially in
stressful.
pregnancy. Like if so in pregnancy too, like maybe don't follow all the checklist of like, I got to
Yes.
do all these things this week and all these things this week. Like, cause
Mhm.
that's something that's just going to cloud a lot of that as well.
Exactly.
Especially if you're like me and like, cause I'm recovering from this, like that mental overload, like I had to just like the first pregnancy, I was so like, I got to know everything about my baby this week and reading so much and consuming so much that I had to like scale it back a lot. I think education's beautiful and we have a lot of it today and it's great, and do
Mhm.
be educated and do be informed, but also know where that balance is for yourself and don't overconsume, because that was a part of my journey too.
Yes, absolutely. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we actually do kind of leave this audience with your story?
I think it's just like, if you're unsure, if you're feeling like, hesitant, but you, for some reason you're thinking like it's a pull, right? It's this inner knowing of like, I could do birth differently the next time, or maybe I could heal this birth. Like if you're feeling like that, hearing that little voice, like follow it, trust that, find, somebody to work with to heal whatever you need to heal from your first birth, because I think that makes a huge difference as well. It did for me. Um, so that at the end of the day, like whatever happens, right? Birth is unpredictable, but whatever happens, if you're having another birth, you can be at peace with it, knowing that you did everything that's in your control, but then surrendering and letting go of the rest. And I think what needs to that's a beautiful journey in and of itself. If you can do that from one birth to the next, is like knowing what's within your control, letting pregnancy and birth transform you, because it is very transformative, letting it become you being closer to the version of you who you truly are. And then just like surrendering and letting go of the control and trusting yourself, trusting the timing of your baby, trusting your baby. Like I grew a big relationship with my baby, and trusting her and talking to her and, everything. I just trusted her so much. I trusted myself so much. I trusted my body so much that no matter what happened, I knew it was whatever needed to happen. The healing that I did from the first birth, I knew it was what needed to happen in order to propel me into this journey, to find that deeper sense of trust and surrender in my own life, and not gripping to control everything, and like letting go, and just surrendering and trusting. And it really brought me more and more into my feminine energy. So I think the more that you
Mm.
can heal whatever is there for you to heal, like I think it's a rebirth, like you said, like throughout your whole pregnancy and the birth, like you are being reborn into more of who you are, but there's beautiful lessons for you to learn along the way if you
Absolutely.
just allow them to be there and tune into them and work through them and let them guide you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. Well, if somebody would want to like connect with you further, or if they even want to work with you, what would be like the
Yeah,
best way for them to get into contact with you?
I love that. They can definitely find me on Instagram. My handle is just my name, Brielle Brazil. They can also reach out through email. It's briellebrazil@briellebrazil.com. And those would be the best two avenues to go to.
Perfect. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing your story. I'm so appreciative of you just like
Yes.
coming and being so very just like beautiful and transparent with everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be here. So I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I hope you loved that episode as much as I loved creating it. And if you want to learn more, be sure to download your free VBAC resource guide for even more tips and advice at birthingcometrue.com/VBAC guide. And don't forget to subscribe to the Journey to VBAC so you never miss an episode. Until next time, trust in yourself and remember, you are amazing no matter how your birth unfolds. Bye for now.